So this is the strange story of one of the most powerful ever exploits in the history of World of Warcraft. In the last few days, Blizzard accidentally turned tens of thousands of players into insanely powerful raid bosses, unleashing chaos, confusion, and controversy. For a brief time, you could have over 2 billion health, more than a raid boss, and you could one-shot many bosses in the game. Yet few, if any, managed to realize the full, insane potential of this exploit. Welcome to Archvaldor's Hacks with Archvalder and his amazing hacks. Shortly after the Lunar Festival started on the 28th of January, reports began appearing on the official forums of players logging in to discover that they had an amazing 2.147 billion health. This immediately generated a lot of paranoia amongst people whose characters had been glitched out about potentially being banned, and others were accusing those players of using an exploit. In fact, no one, apart from me obviously, had any intention of doing this deliberately. It was entirely accidental. No one seemed to know what had happened, but I did, because there was a very similar exploit which had allowed me to solo Orgrimmar some years back. So you glitched out your health using the following method. During the Lunar Festival, there are spirits, elders, all across Azeroth, offering quests which can be completed simply by clicking on one. These quests award you a lucky envelope, which awards you either a coin or a lucky rocket cluster. When thrown into a cluster launcher, this rocket awards everyone within 20 yards a bonus to health. The amount of the bonus depends on the player's level, but was meant to be relatively small. Now, here's where the glitch comes in. When you logged out and back in again, something broke. Somehow you ended up with 2 billion health. It didn't matter if you logged back in straight away or after a day. Your health would be glitched. This led to a lot of people logging in first thing in the morning to discover their character was now as powerful as the strongest characters in the game, doing mythic raids and the like. This wasn't actually as game-breaking as people thought. You see, if you teleported, entered a dungeon, battleground or raid, the buff was instantly removed. It was fun for duels and world PvP and winding people up outside capital cities, but that was about it, at least for most people. You see, I noticed just a few reports in amongst all the others of players who were somehow using this buff in instances. Somehow they were bypassing the severe zoning restrictions on the buff. I tried a ton of different tricks I developed over the years to no avail, but then struck gold with one of the most broken features ever introduced to Warcraft, Party Sync. If you glitched out your character, then had them join a group, then turned on Party Sync, and then turned it off again, the buff would be removed, but your character's health would stay permanently glitched out. And because the buff no longer existed, the health increase remained even when you ported into another zone, dungeon, or even raid. Now, as I mentioned, people often speculate about these bugs and fantasize about killing mythic raid bosses and the like. In truth, it is almost never that easy, partly because the mechanics of modern raid bosses are more complex than the tank and spank affairs they used to be, but also because things like health exploits don't increase your damage output. Or do they? Or do they? Or do they? Yes, they do. But there are some abilities which are based on player health. There's a few of these. The most obvious one is Monk's Touch of Death. In theory, Touch of Death can one-shot any mob. If we look at the tooltip for the ability, it states, inflicts mortal damage on an enemy, causing the target to take damage equal to 35% of your maximum health after 8 seconds, reduced against players. No, I don't know why I read it like that either. Now, 35% of 2.147 billion is just over 750 million. How Touch of Death works is anyone's guess. It glitches out a lot. Now, I first tested this out on some toys, which are effectively target dummies, and it is really random. For example, it works perfectly on the rubber fish head and Loveful toys, but this turnip is completely resistant. I'm sure there's an amazing far out lore theory in there somewhere. Maybe turnips were created directly by the Titans. As it turns out, this is true of bosses too. I went to Orgrimmar to kill the Troll City boss, expecting a massive fight. In fact, it took seconds. It was so fast, I ended up doing it twice. Touch of Death works perfectly here. It also works very well against dungeon bosses, as I'm demonstrating. The problem with dungeons and raids isn't the bosses. They can be easily killed with Touch of Death. It's the trash, since you're entirely reliant for your mega damage on Touch of Death. It did not work in Nerebar Palace at all. You could only do normal damage against the mobs here, and it simply took too long. I knew that Blizzard would likely fix the opportunity in hours, so I didn't want to waste too much time. With a raid team behind you, of course, you could make short work of any type of raid boss, as you had an invincible tank effectively, but that would have taken time to set up. Touch of Death also did not work against the Aggregation of Horrors world boss in the Ringing Deeps, though I was able to kill that boss in an epic battle by grinding its health down slowly over time. For some reason, the glitch was completely ineffective in instanced PvP. As soon as you entered combat, your massive health pool just disappeared, often with comical results. Nonetheless, despite some of the limitations, this has to go down as one of, if not the biggest exploit in World of Warcraft's history, simply because of the number of people affected and the combination of both invincibility and potential damage increases, added to the fact that, unlike most game-breaking exploits, it wasn't limited to a specific class and could be taken into high-level content. My only regret was that I didn't get longer to test out various strategies with this rare exploit. For example, I really wanted to test Paladin's Shield of Vengeance and other health-based abilities. I had very little time to develop this exploit, which was very simple in principle, but to make the full use of it was really complicated. I was desperately trying to get enough information to feed to my patrons so they could make use of it before it was fixed, and also shoot enough footage for this video. These things don't last very long. If you want to hear about them in future, subscribe to this channel, and you might want to consider joining my Patreon, where I send alerts about exactly this type of exploit as soon as I discover them in real time.